Good morning. I have prepared this presentation to briefly describe how France faced its elderly problems over the year. This permits to consider different gerontological problems that are encountered by all countries. Some of them have been resolved in France more or less, others are still the subject of debates. The best way to understand is to start at the moment of the creation of our social security, after the Second World War. It was in 1945 that the social security system was set up, which is still the one we have today. It was a great moment of brotherhood after the painful period that the French people had just gone through. They wanted a real system of solidarity. They wanted an universal social security system. The founders pursued two main objectives. One, universal access to medical care for all. Two, a decent income for all retired workers, because many fell into poverty when they were no longer able to work. To achieve these goals, the government decided to build an universal social security system. On one hand, a mandatory health insurance system. On the other hand, a retirement scheme for all workers. A system financed on a demographic basis, where healthcare expenses are paid by healthy workers and pensions are paid by working people. It's, in a word, a Bismarckian system managed by the workers themselves through their major trade union. In this scheme, the political authorities, government, do not intervene. Its only mission is to control the good functioning of the social security system. But since the social protection system has existed, it has been the subject of constant concern for political authorities. The most important and most constant concern is that of its financial balance. But since the foundation of the social security, the state is obliged to intervene all the time. To try to see things more clearly, the legislator has separated the action of social security into different branches. On one hand, a sickness branch concerning the payment of medical care, then an old age branch concerning pension, and later a dependency sector for the elderly, which has remained separate from that of the young people. A threshold based on the legal retirement age separates the two programs. As regards the elderly specifically, beyond general question of a balanced budget, two other subjects of discussion have focused and continue to focus on two main themes. One, the retirement age. And this is an important point because over the time, the retirement age and the old age no longer coincide. The retirement age is decreasing, while the old age threshold is increasing. Secondly, how to promote the health of the elderly. First of all, how to take into account functional disability linked to age, what in France we call dépendance. Secondly, how to improve the quality of life and social integration of the elderly. To better understand the orientation of France concerning the elderly, I suggest that we follow a chronological order, starting from the creation of Social Security until now. For this, I have chosen, in a very personal and arbitrary way, 7 key dates which allowed us to understand the evolution of ideas, problems, and decisions that have been taken in the field of gerontology in France. I begin in 1962, which is the date of a report which very often is considered as a starting point for taking into account the problem of the elderly. Then I continue until the last decisions which concerned in 2016 the taking into account of the burden of elderly informal carer who have to cope with a relative who had significant disability. In France, Pierre Laroque is considered in a way as the father of Social Security. In an interview given for the 50th anniversary of Social Security, he told how in August 1945, at the liberation of Paris, being a soldier in General Leclerc's army, an envoy from the provisional government came to look for him even in his tank, of which he was a gunner, to order him to come and prepare the creation of Social Security, as decided by the National Council of the Resistance in London, in which he participated as a senior official of Free France. He said, "We were carried away by the mood of the moment." When the law was passed, he became the first general director of Social Security. But it was in 1962 that it was realized that while the generalization of pensions for older workers was a good thing, not enough consideration have been given to the situation of people with difficulty in daily life activities. This is how a commission responsible for these issues was created and chaired by Pierre Laroque, who at that time was no longer director of the Social Security. At least 2 main decisions are attached to this commission. First, the principle of maintaining elderly at home. This principle is adopted as a desirable objective until now. Secondly, the setting up of professional help in order to help disabled elderly with an income threshold for its allowance. I choose this date of 1972 and the publication of this work by a sociologist named Anne-Marie Guimard to point out another question raised at that time, but which is still remain a question not to be overlooked today. Paul Paya, which is a demographer, wanted to underline this important work. With this work, he wanted to ensure that the integration of people into society, regardless of their age, must not be neglected. This is indeed a condition to avoiding discrimination of people by age, one way or the other. This is always a topical issue, especially at this time of pandemic that we are going through. This work also shows how heterogeneous the elderly population is. 1983 is the year of a great national debate on the inclusion of pensioners in the elderly in society. Regarding the 1983 national Conference on Retirement and Elderly People. With hindsight, it is quite difficult to identify what remains. However, the important event during this period, after 1981, with the arrival of a socialist government, was the decision to change the legal retirement age from 65 to 60 years. Now we continue to struggle with this election promise. This decision led to at least two kinds of consequences. A consequence for the financing of pension, you think. Another consequence is that we consider separately disabled people before or after the legal retirement age. In fact, we gerontologists, we would like to eliminate this threshold, but we never succeed. Next slide refers to a period from 1997 to 2002. 5 years were necessary to build an assistance service for the elderly with difficulties in daily life activities. I will not detail the adventure of this project, which was carried out in several stages, as indicated here, but this project gave rise to many discussions concerning, in particular, the choice of the instrument to assess the level of dependency, the threshold of coverage, and the amount of benefit according to the level of disability, and the type of allowance according to the place where elderly live, at home or in institution. We consider that the year 2003 is a black date for French gerontology, I think. The heat wave that took place that year led to a significant excess mortality among isolated elderly people. Almost 15,000 additional deaths were observed this year. This episode conducted in response to the creation in 2005 to the CNSA, Caisse nationale de solidarité pour l'autonomie, National Solidarity Fund for Autonomy. It's something important for us. This Caisse nationale de solidarité pour l'autonomie is both a fund dedicated to problems related to autonomy, dependency, disability, and handicap, and for all age, with a specific governance with the representation of users, and a budget implemented by a Solidarity Day and a specific social security contribution. Secondly, it's a technical agency with study and apply research potential, and it's an important date for gerontology in France. 2007 is the year of a plan dedicated specifically to Alzheimer's disease. In the framework of a broad consultation of experts, all aspects relating to this disease were examined. The result was a 44-point response plan divided along 3 axes, which are mentioned on this slide. The first axis concerns improving the quality of life of patients and their caregivers. The second concerns the promotion of research on this disease. And the third concerns the raising of society awareness of this disease in its aspects of communication, of ethical reflection, and European cooperation. This last slide allows me to mention two recent measures of gerontological management in France. They relate to a 2016 law on which name is on the adaptation of society to aging. I have retained two developments that illustrate the current movement toward the elderly. On one hand, the generalization of multidimensional comprehensive evaluation by the teams who locally assess people with a view of assigning them services, contrary to what was previously practiced. Assessments are no longer limited to the criteria for the award of the Personal Autonomy Allowance, APA, but assess the overall situation of the person in his or her life context. The objective is to implement all the benefits that can be mobilized for a person and not just the APA, as we have done until then. On the other hand, recognition of the burden of a former caregiver, spouse, children, close family, through an allowance for assistance to non-professional caregivers. And by going through these few key dates, I have tried to give you a simplified, by I hope correct, panorama of gerontological action in France by raising the questions that have arisen during this large period. Some of these questions have received answers that are more or less complete. There are still other questions, and I think you have similar issues as well, and we will all benefit from sharing them. Thank you for your attention.